What time is it? Can this count as lunch? Probably not. It's 11.
You ready to order?
Yeah.
Hi. Hello.
And what do you want, Hannah?
Could I have one of the carrot and courgette muffins, please?
Of course you can.
Could I also get a toasty?
Yeah.
Which would you recommend, the cheese and onion or the cheese and pesto?
Pesto.
Yeah.
The pesto is delicious.
Yeah,
It's good.
cool, I'll go for that one then.
Yes.
Please. Just tap.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Let's go sit at the sun. You're listening to Crowd Science from the BBC World Service. I'm Caroline Steele, and right now I'm sat outside a cafe that only serves certain food. So I'll give you a clue. I've got a turmeric latte, and my toastie's just arrived. So here we go. So while I'm finishing this, let's hear this week's question from listener Claire.
My name is Claire and I currently live in Perth, Western Australia. My question is, I've heard there's growing opinions that the gut plays a role in a person's overall mental health. Is this true?
What made you think of the question?
This is just personal experience, but sometimes if I've, had like a weekend where I'm just eating terrible foods and not feeling so great, but the longer term implications could be that your diet basically affects your mental health. And then the inverse of that, maybe instead of medication and those sorts of maybe harsher solutions, simply certain foods that we eat can maybe make a more positive impact that way.
Yeah, I'm just hoping it's not sauerkraut or... I'm hoping it's going to be chocolate is good for your mental health. That would be lovely.
I think it does make sense that the foods we eat influence our gut bacteria and all of that basically having an impact over our whole body and then our moods and that sort of thing. So my gut, no pun intended, is that I think there is a link.
Our guts are filled with bacteria. We feed them by eating food and they help us out by digesting that food. We made an episode about how your microbiome affects your physical health earlier this year. You can dip into our back catalogue and download What's Living Inside My Gut wherever you get your BBC podcasts. But we've also had questions from you lovely listeners about how our gut microbiome affects our mental health. So I put listener Claire's gut feeling that there's a link between what she eats and how she feels to Jane Foster, Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Texas in the US.
The gut and the brain are connected through the gut-brain axis, which has been studied for potentially hundreds of years from a more conceptual perspective. But in the last 20 years, we've got to know a little bit more about the mechanisms by which, for example, the microbes in your gut might communicate with your brain. So the gut-brain axis refers to all the biological systems that connect the body's gastrointestinal tract to the brain. And these might include those microbes that reside within our gastrointestinal system. It also includes the connections between our body and our brain.
So, Claire, you're right. Our guts are connected to our brains. And there are three main ways that they communicate. The first communication highway is our immune system.
So your microbes in your gut, they line that tube, that gastrointestinal tube. And on the other side of that lining is this mucosal system of immune cells that can both regulate the function of your gut, but also can communicate with the rest of your body. And so we need our microbes in order for our adaptive aspect of our immune system, that part of our immune system that reacts to pathogens and to other challenges, to develop. So there's this continual bidirectional communication between your gut microbes and your immune system. And what's been discovered in the past decade is early in life, some of those immune cells actually can go up and land in the spaces around your brain, and they can influence both brain development and they can influence things later in life. So these immune cells are sort of mobile messengers that can sample what's happening in your gut based on your microbes and what your microbes are doing and actually communicate that signal to the brain.
So if you eat something dodgy, might the microbes in your gut communicate that with your immune cells? Is that a sort of pathway that could happen?
That is a pathway that can happen. So again, the evidence suggests that one of the key pathways that links your gut bacteria to mental health could be through inflammation. Both these immune cells that the gut bacteria influence, who can communicate with the brain, but also with just general inflammation across the body, which is known to have an impact on mental health, including depressive symptoms and anxiety symptoms. So that's one of the pathways that we think is being modulated by gut bacteria, and therefore might actually respond to microbiome targeted therapies, or if we're informed, to trigger to see which people is this microbe immune connection actually driving their symptoms of mental health.
And another communication pathway is something called the vagus nerve.
So the vagus nerve is a bidirectional nerve, which means it both communicates from your body to your brain as a sensory nerve, but it also is a path between your brain and your body. It's the longest sensory nerve in your body, and so it innervates all of those gut areas, and it is an important connector for a neural connection for your brain to know what's happening in your gut. So it's one of the primary pathways that your gut microbes, by communicating with the nerve endings of your vagus nerve, can actually send signals to your brain.
Changes in your gut bacteria can stimulate your vagus nerve, which can do things like reduce anxiety and stress. And our immune response to the contents of our guts can alter our brains too. The final pathway happens when the food in our guts just sits there, fermenting. Lovely.
So the other pathways are these metabolites. So when we think about the microbes, it's not just who's there, but what are they doing? And one of the things they do is they produce these metabolites, which are called short chain fatty acids. And so this is one of the things that they do that can actually both influence the barrier integrity, but it can actually change host metabolites such that some of those molecules end up in your bloodstream, and those metabolites can influence the brain as well.
When our food ferments, our microbes produce metabolites to help break it down, and these chemicals can pass through the gut wall and end up in our brains. But once they get there, what do? Are they friend or foe?
It actually depends on the kind of bacteria you are promoting in your gut. If you promote really healthy bacteria, it will generate more healthy chemicals, and that will cross the blood-brain barrier and go into your brain.
This is Najaf Amin, a senior researcher at the Nuffield Department of Population Health at the University of Oxford.
For instance, butyrate is produced when you take lots and lots of fiber, which is coming actually from fresh fruits and vegetables and whole grains.
Okay, so what does butyrate do when it gets to your brain?
So butyrate can be used as an energy source by the cells, and butyrate also can increase the expression of the genes and increase the translation of genes to proteins, which are required for your body to function.
Okay, so eating more fibre can literally lead to changes in your brain. It can increase energy output and protein production. That's huge.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to take eating more fibre a little bit more seriously. Are there any studies that link our microbiome directly with our mental health?
Yes. One of the studies that I have recently published, it is the largest study done so far, linking depression to the gut microbiome. And there we have identified 13 microbiota that are influencing depression. And one of these were Agathella, and we found a causal link between Agathella and the symptoms of depression.
Najaf identified this depression-causing microbe by sampling the poo of 1,400 people. Glamorous work, much like the first ever study to find a causal link between gut microbiomes and mental health.
About a decade ago, a study was published, and that was done on rats, actually. And in that study, what they did was they transferred the feces of depressed human individuals into germ-free rats. And what they observed was that upon the transfer of this feces, the rats developed symptoms of depression as well. So that study actually shows that there is a causal link of the gut microbiota with depression.
Okay, so they got some faeces from some depressed humans, transferred it into some rats, and then observed the rats, and it looked like they were depressed after this transplant.
Yes.
Oh, I mean, poor rats, but that is very interesting. Although this rat study was the first to look at the causal link between our microbiome and depression, the idea that what we eat can change how we feel has been around for thousands of years. From the ancient Greek philosophers like Hippocrates,
all diseases begin in the gut,
to the medieval times where people thought different bodily fluids could change your personality. So if someone was mentally unwell, it was thought that they might have an imbalance of blood, phlegm, black bile or yellow bile. Or like in the 1600s, where, according to Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, an extravagant dinner might make you less funny.
I am a great eater of beef, and I believe that does harm to my wit.
So are you serving the soup today? Yeah.
The cafe we visited at the start of this show is actually part of that history. It's attached to the anxiety unit at Bethlem Royal Hospital in South London, which is where the word Bedlam comes from. But there are no signs of Bedlam here.
So we're in kind of like a little garage, I think, and it's really interesting because I believe that this is the garage of John Porter Phillips, who was the superintendent of the Bethlem back in 1914 till like 1930.
This is Joel Oliver, occupational therapist, CBT therapist, and cafe manager.
And he was quite a radical at the time, and he actually tried to treat people with melancholia with kefir. So we're in his garage, and we've kitted it out as a kitchen.
So he was the maybe first person that did a study that linked diet to mental health.
He was, yes. Indeed.
And we're in probably his garage right now.
We're in his garage, yeah, where he used to keep his car.
That's great.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, and it's nice to have that nod to history, really. It's nice to continue it.
The garage, now cafe, is called Guts.
So this is a patient-led cafe which focuses on trying to get our residents who are with us for 16 weeks, they have either a diagnosis of obsessive compulsive disorder or a body dysmorphic disorder and other treatment-resistant anxiety disorders. We try and get those residents as involved as we can in creating gut-healthy food that they can then serve to the hospital site and members of the public.
So it kind of has two purposes. One in that you're serving food that's good for your gut.
Yep.
And then also this could be a great part of someone's treatment plan, coming and working in a cafe and sort of helping them as well as helping the people who are, ordering stuff from the cafe.
Yeah, so just really interested, I think, as a unit on being really self-sufficient, and we were running a group which was called From Plot to Plate, where we would grow some of the ingredients through our cooking group. But then we wanted from plot to plate to perfect poo, because we got very interested in having good poo. And I guess we noticed that a number of our residents would suffer with constipation and stuff like that. So we know that eating fibrous vegetables really, really good and can ease constipation.
So in your work as a CBT therapist, have you noticed that your diet can have an impact on your mental health?
Absolutely. Having things that are, I guess, more natural, that contain less sugars, and it's something that we speak about a lot at our unit.
How do you decide what's on the menu here? So you've got some really delicious stuff, but it's probably not your typical cafe menu.
Yeah.
How do you pick from a gut point of view what you're going to put on the menu?
Yeah, we want to keep it really gut healthy, but we don't want to push that too much. We want to make it accessible for everyone. Like the tiffin bars are nice, bit naughty, but they really diverse. They contain loads of seeds, loads of nuts. As a collective, as a community, that's how we try and make our decisions. So yeah, working with our two amazing residents, Toby and Alice at the moment, they just wanted to trial loads of ideas, and I guess we've given that space to do so.
You're listening to Crowd Science on the BBC World Service. I'm Caroline Steele, and we've been looking into a gut feeling from listener Claire, that the food she eats affects how she feels. And we now know that Claire's gut feeling isn't just a feeling. There's scientific evidence that the bacteria in our gut can lead to stress, depression and anxiety. Something Toby, a Bethlem Hospital resident and Guts Cafe barista, has experience of firsthand.
Cheese taste. No pesto. Do you want tomato or anything like that in it? No worries. I suffer with OCD, so that's what I'm predominantly here for, being treated. My weight over the years has completely yo-yoed. I've gone from 13 stone to 27 and yo-yoed up and down, up and down, up and down. And I think, like a lot of people, I've been petrified of things that are higher in fat and nuts and things, eating nuts, because, and there's so much misinformation out there. You look at one thing and someone says, this is fantastic for you, eat as many sweet potatoes as you can, and then you scroll along and the next person says, oh, don't eat sweet potatoes, they're awful for you. And there's so much misinformation out there. And I definitely feel a lot mentally healthier eating this sort of food and being involved in this sort of food preparation. I've looked at probiotics and things. I've researched stuff I've never looked into, and I've learnt new words, which is amazing for me anyway.
You mentioned you've started looking into probiotics. Is your microbiome something that you're thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you heard it from Joel earlier. He's very interested in our poos as well, because that's ultimately what it ends up. And, the gut health that goes along with that. And the sort of more I think about it, the more sense it makes. And, all this type of food that we're now eating and sort of preparing, I think all of us are feeling a lot better for it, mentally and physically.
Now, food isn't the only thing that can change our microbiome. Genetics and environment have a role too, but food is definitely the easiest thing to change. So, you can get a tiffin, a toasty. The toasty flavours are cheese and onion or cheese and pesto. Then you can get gluten-free carrot and courgette muffins. David Veal is a consultant psychiatrist and visiting professor at King's College London and the Maudsley Hospital London. But most importantly, he helps decide the Guts Cafe menu. You've got English breakfast, ginger, green, jasmine, mint, and then hot chocolate.
Well, we do not provide any ultra-processed foods. We provide plenty of diversity in the range of different foods available, and have got plenty of probiotics and prebiotics. These are all things which will feed the gut, which will feed your bacteria, which will feed your brain.
In your work as a psychiatrist, do you ever talk about nutrition and diet with your clients?
I do, to find out what it is that they are eating, but it's still not usually something that a psychiatrist, psychologist will ask. So people might tend to focus on what their appetite light is and whether they're neglecting themselves, and these are of course important, but actually the detail in terms of what you're eating may also be important.
So do you ever sort of suggest diet changes, bearing in mind the sort of microbiome-brain link? Or are we not quite at that stage yet?
When patients are interested, I would. But it's quite difficult to help people to change their diet. It's difficult enough for everybody in the public to try to change their diet and to have that good nutritional guidance. And at the moment, it's still very much in a grey area between research and clinical practice. So we don't fully understand it. But, when people are interested, we'll definitely try to help improve it. But the emerging evidence is that eating a healthy diet, according to one which is gut healthy, can help improve your mood and levels of anxiety.
I think it's quite tricky, isn't it? Because, I've been lucky enough to never suffer from a serious mental health condition. But, if I'm feeling a bit down, the last thing I want to do is cook a nice whole food meal. I'm much more likely to buy a donut. Where I imagine if you have clinical depression, the sort of thought of seriously adjusting your diet would be very overwhelming.
I think the message is, look, it's unlikely that diet alone is going to treat something like depression or anxiety disorders or OCD. It's likely to be one part of the jigsaw, because there's an emerging theme now of lifestyle is important, whether it's your level of activity, whether it's your diet, whether it's your sleep, whether it's your connection to others. All these things may be things which we can modify and help improve the mental disorder. But, it's not going to probably cure you.
For people listening to this who want to make a couple of realistic changes to support their mental health, what can they do?
Well, I think the first thing to say is what's probably good for your mental health is also good for your physical health. So we probably don't want to separate the two, but that's obviously what my main interest is in. But in general, we want you to have a more plant-based diet, one which is often referred to like a Mediterranean diet, one which has got full of fibrous foods. Fibrous foods are things like your artichokes and your asparagus and your leeks and your onions and your nuts and legumes, things like that, as well as having plenty of the prebiotics, that is things like your kefir and your live yogurts and cheeses and your kombuchas and so on, anything that's got plenty of bacteria in, and eating the rainbow, that is plenty of polyphenols, which are also good for your gut bacteria.
So, sadly, it's not chocolate that's good for our mental health, and it is sauerkraut. The stuff we've been told is good for our bodies is also good for our brains. But all the research our experts have mentioned so far have been looking into Western diets. What about elsewhere in the world?
So I'm originally from Turkey, and I moved to the States many years ago. Then I moved back to Turkey after having my master's degree, and I worked as a social worker for 1 year. Then I moved to Hong Kong to have my PhD degree. Then I ended up staying there for 10 years. And I recently moved to Chicago, and currently I am an associate professor in the School of Social Work at Dominican University.
This is Gizem Arat. She studied the impact diet has on mental health of people in sub-Saharan Africa.
So I find that it generally claims that there is a positive relationship between nutrition and mental health outcomes, meaning that if they have a higher intake of fruit and vegetable, it means that they will be more likely to show positive mental health outcomes. But it differs in some countries in the African region. So I was also interested, why in some specific countries, higher fruit intake actually linked to poor mental health outcomes.
Gizem's study found inconsistent results. Some sub-Saharan African countries which eat more fruit and veg have better mental health, while others have worse.
And some research informed me that there might be some factors that hasn't been included in the survey. So probably it should be other factors like maybe extended family support. So maybe if they have a less support from the close relatives, maybe it triggered their poor mental health. So I'm not so sure about it, but there might be some reason.
Gizem was very limited by the data. She was using results of a self-reported World Health Organization survey, so she couldn't get a clear picture of what was going on. But what is clear is that more research, or any research really, into non-Western diets and the impact on mental health is needed. Bethlehem Hospital's John Porter Phillips may have been improving his clients' mood with fermented milk over 100 years ago, but really this field is still in its infancy. Only recently has it been shown that our gut bacteria influences our mental health, and it's all very well saying a specific microbe can cause depression, but that then needs to be translated to the right food for a specific person. Which means psychiatrists like David aren't yet prescribing certain diets to support recovery. But I have an idea. Can we just shortcut it? Skip the diet change and swallow a pill filled with the nice brain-friendly bacteria. Here's population health researcher Najaf Amin again.
This is what we are trying to do, to identify exactly which strains are good, which strains are bad. Once we have that information, then you'll see that there will be really formulations coming up and I'm sure that those formulations are going to help relieve the symptoms of depression.
I mean, that would be incredible. How far off do you think we are from that? Have you got any guess of a timescale?
It's not far off. I mean, by now, I have a very good idea of what is good and what is bad for depression. And if a therapy like this, if you can treat by just improving the gut health or by diet, by changes in your diet, your health will improve in general. So it's not about only depression, but it's about the entire body.
Claire, your gut feeling was right. Our microbiome does affect our brain, and it does so via our immune system, vagus nerve, and the metabolites released by our gut microbes. And this communication pathway is serious. Certain microbes have been shown to actually cause depression. So, if you want to look after your head, it makes sense to look after your microbes. And one way you can do that is through the food you put into your mouth. So when you next go to the supermarket, I would put these kinds of things in your trolley. Fibrous foods like leeks, stuff full of bacteria like John Porter Phillips's kefir, colourful foods like red cabbage, and avoid ultra-processed foods and sugar. Right. Speaking of food, we're nearly at the end of the show, which means I'd better finish off my toastie and actually also producer Hannah's muffin. Oh, it's very moist. I'm just ploughing through this muffin. You're like, here, have a bite. I'm like, I need to take many bites to do a decent review, okay?
It's fine. You can have it if you want.
It's great. It's genuinely a very good muffin. Claire, it's time for you to do the credits.
That's it for this edition of Crowd Science from the BBC World Service. This week's question was from me, Claire, from Perth, Western Australia. The program was presented by Caroline Steele and produced by Hannah Fisher. If you have a question, please email crowdscience@bbc.co.uk. Thanks for listening. Bye.